Over a 30-year period, Nannie Doss would kill 4 of her husbands, 2 of her children, 2 grandchildren, her mother, her sister, and her mother-in-law. Her nicknames have been the Jolly Black Widow and the Giggling Granny because she does not look the part of a serial killer. Nannie marries her first husband Charles at the age of 16, and together the two have 4 children between 1921 to 1927. It's not a happy marriage, and one day Charles comes home and finds the bodies of 2 of his middle-aged daughters on the kitchen floor dead. He clearly asks his wife what happened, and she just replies, "It must have been food poisoning." As odd as it is, their deaths are not looked into by law enforcement. The husband is spooked enough to file for divorce and leave with his eldest daughter. Husband number 1 is lucky because he gets away. In 1929, at the age of 24, Nannie marries her second husband. His name is Frank. He's an abusive alcoholic. During this time, Nannie reconnects with her oldest daughter. Malvina moves in and eventually meets her own husband. Malvina marries, has a baby, and then in July 1945, she has her second child. During the delivery of Malvina's second child, she experiences a lot of complications. Nannie obviously comes to the hospital to help comfort her daughter, but also to meet her newest grandchild. At the hospital, Nannie cradles the baby, and everything seems very normal. But then, an hour later, the baby suddenly just dies. Doctors are unsure on why the baby would have just died suddenly, but Malvina believes that she recalls seeing something. Malvina recalls that she saw her mother stab the baby in its head with a pin. For context, at the time Malvina was half asleep. She was also drugged still on some pain meds, and she's just trying to wrap her head around it because she can't even fathom that that would be a realistic possibility. So she convinces herself that that wasn't actually reality. After the death of the baby, Malvina and her husband drift apart. Months later, Malvina would leave her 2-year-old son with her mother when she went to visit her father. It's during this trip on July 7th, 1945, that Robert mysteriously dies, under the care of Nannie. It's determined that the child died from asphyxiation, but still the fingers are not being pointed at Nannie. 2 months later, she collects a $500 life insurance policy on the child. Also, less than 2 months after the death of her grandson, her husband staggers home one night after a few too many drinks. He assaults her, and then the very next day, she poisons him with arsenic. She adds it to his whiskey, and it leads to an extremely slow and painful death. She cashes out the life insurance policy, buys a plot of land and a house. Now that she has the life insurance policy from husband number 2, she's ready for husband number 3. She meets him while traveling in Lexington, Carolina, and they get married in less than 3 days. The marriage quickly becomes toxic because he's openly cheating on her, and he's leaving the house for months on end at a time. Before Arlie's death, he complains of having stomach pain and vomiting. Doctors associate this with his heavy drinking habits. We now know that Annie poisoned him, and she was planning on receiving his assets, but then she finds out that he left his house to his sister in the will. So Annie is now pissed. What does she do? Well, the house now suddenly burns down mysteriously. After the house burns down, she then visits his mother, and she also mysteriously dies out of the blue. After this, Nannie visits her sister who is sick with cancer, and instead of helping her, giving her a supporting hand, she poisons her as well and then leaves her to rot in her house. Now it's time for husband number 4, Richard Morton. During this time, Nannie's mother unexpectedly visits and says, "I'm going to start living with you." Nannie doesn't want to deal with that, so she handles it like all the others. She poisons her mother. It also turns out that husband number 4 would be like the others and would cheat on her, so she didn't want to tolerate this behavior again. So she fills his thermos in the morning with coffee and a ton of arsenic. She makes sure he drinks it all, and then he quickly dies. And now it's time for husband number 5, Samuel Doss. And unlike all the others, he actually is a respectable guy. He treats her nicely. He doesn't cheat on her. But there's one issue she has a problem with. He's cheap. He puts a limit on her spending. Also, he doesn't allow her to watch the trashy TV shows that she likes or read the romance novels. He only wants her to read educational things. She's not having it. So she bakes him a prune cake and she tries to poison him. But she's not fully effective. Instead, he just gets very ill and he goes to the hospital for flu-like symptoms. He's recuperated over a few weeks and then he comes home. Celebrating his arrival home, Nannie gives him a cup of coffee, but this time it is filled with a ton of arsenic, literally enough to kill a horse. That's what the doctors said. He died just hours later, and the doctor who just treated him is very suspicious because he had just left the hospital and was in perfect health at this time. She wanted this to be done quickly so this way she could collect the 2 life insurance policies that she took out on him. The sudden death alerts the doctor who orders an autopsy. That shows it's very apparent he died of arsenic poisoning. So Nannie, for the first time, is now arrested. When detectives question Nannie about her husband's death, they are very confused because she is extremely cheerful, flirtatious, and giggly when they're asking her about how her husband died. And over time, she eventually confesses to killing him and then also 3 additional husbands too. Although she claims that she never poisoned any of her family, but obviously once she confesses to these 4 murders, they then go and they exhume some of the bodies of the family members who have died. Autopsies showed that the remains of the 3 other husbands and her mother all contained arsenic, while all of the other family members they exhumed showed signs of asphyxiation, so smothering. When asked why, her response was, "I was looking for the perfect mate, real romance in life," she once told reporters. Ultimately, 4 psychiatrists would consider her to be sane, and then she eventually pleaded guilty to her crimes. She was sentenced to life in prison and died of leukemia in 1965.